see if I can. Okay, there's our cue then. So everybody, welcome to our call today. So this is hosted by me. I'm Shelby Lipschutz, and it's part of our Cha-Cha Club, which is a members club for full-time research ops professionals. And in this talk, we're going to have Leah and Carolyn present. But this is a regular event that we will hold, I believe, every quarter for members and non-members alike, where we can all kind of share thoughts on research ops and what's going on in that world. So for me, I am based in Austin, Texas. I am a UX Research Operations Program Manager at IBM. I'm also a member of the Cha-Cha Club. Today, we're going to have these amazing speakers speak on what they're doing to make good on the promise of research ethics and data privacy and security requirements. So before we dive in, we have a word from our sponsors, user interviews. So Erin, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Erin here. I am the SVP of Marketing at User Interviews. Thanks for having me. I recognize some familiar faces and lots of new faces. I won't take too much of your time, but if you're not familiar with us, we are the platform for recruiting quality participants for absolutely any kind of research. You can do that with our panel of over 4 million participants, or build your own panel with our Research Hub products. The other quick thing I'll share with you today is that we have just launched a free course, which may be of interest to some of your teams for folks who are new to research. So for your designers, your product managers who are looking for a kind of quick ramp to help with the democratization process in your org. So check that if you're interested, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. That sounds awesome. All right, so let's get to Leah. Leah is a design research operations director at the design and consulting firm IDEO. In her role, Leah creates systems to support great research and connects teams with people who can provide insight and inspiration to fuel the design process. So I'll hand it over to Leah, and we'll jump into our first presentation.
Cool. Thanks so much, Shelby. Okay, sharing my screen. Can everyone see this? Fantastic. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to be here today too, because we wrote a book and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with all of you. But first, I'll introduce myself just a little bit more. This is me. I'm a design research operations director at IDEO. I've been there for about 4.5 years. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Saw a lot of other folks in the Bay Area in the chat. And when I'm not working, I love to run around the hills in San Francisco, make things, and spend time with my dog, Sam. And I was part of the team that wrote the new edition of the Little Book of Design Research Ethics. So that's why I'm here chatting with y'all today. So this isn't the first book. In 2015, we actually published the first edition of the Little Book of Design Research Ethics, and it was written to provide design teams at IDEO and beyond with guidelines for ethical design research. And 2015 was like, it's hard to believe that's about 10 years ago, but a lot has changed in the world since then. We had a global pandemic, the movement for Black lives, new and emergent technologies, and an increasingly interconnected world. All of these things have influenced and reshaped our approach to research and design. And in this second edition, we continued to provide a common starting place for conversations about ethics in design research, but we've also added new sections that reflect our growth and learning. And so for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to follow the book's structure. I'll walk us through the principles that ground us, and then I'll share our process with some very practical examples of how these principles have been operationalized by folks at IDEO. So one thing that remains consistent also over time and is a through line uniting these two books is really encapsulated in this quote from Jane, who was IDEO's first human factors designer and researcher. And she said, ethical design research is about the quality of relationships. Our goal is to manifest trust in individuals, to build communities of trust, and to form trusting relationships with the people we're designing for and alongside. And so in service of this, we've laid the foundation with 5 principles for ethical design research, which I will share in a moment. And so really just to frame our time together, this is a talk in 2 parts, just like the format of the book. Part 1 will focus on principles, and then part 2 will focus on the principles in action. So our 5 principles that lay the foundation for ethical research are respect, responsibility, honesty, inclusion, and evolution. Respect, we believe in the inherent capacities, creativity, and expertise in all people, including our research participants. We respect the information and data they share by listening deeply, by clarifying our understanding, and by taking diligent and confidential notes to help honor their stories and their points of view. Responsibility, we seek ongoing and informed consent from participants, and we are responsible stewards of their data and information. We are mindful of potential risks to participants at all of the different phases of the design process, and we actively work to prevent, mitigate, and when it's necessary, hold ourselves accountable for repairing any harms. Honesty, we are transparent with participants about who we are, our goals, and our approaches. We communicate clearly and early and often, providing opportunities for questions and clarification. And when we don't have answers, or if we need to keep some of that information confidential, we're honest about what those limitations are. We respect what we learn from our research accurately, and we also are honest about the gaps that might exist in our knowledge. When we can't speak to something, we're honest about that. Inclusion. So this is the first of 2 new principles that we added to this new edition of the book. We seek out the perspectives of those who have marginalized facets of their identities in our research. We do that without tokenizing their experiences or expecting them to represent an entire group to which they belong. We do our best to enable inclusive participation in research. By example, we interview folks in their preferred language. We meet folks in their preferred space, or when it's needed, we provide reimbursement for childcare. And then evolution is the second of the 2 new principles that we added in the 2nd edition. It's a commitment to an ongoing dialogue about ethical practices in design research. So we invite our designers to shape this work by carving out time for reflection, having these tough conversations, and really critically engaging with the content in this book on our projects. And because this book was designed with multiple audiences in mind, we also wanted to offer this kind of like quick guide or cheat sheet to help any practitioner of research share in our commitments. So these are things we always want to make sure we're doing in our research. So regardless of the situation, we always tell the truth. Honor our commitments to participants. Collect only what we need. Use what we collect only for its intended purposes. Protect participants' privacy. And express gratitude and provide compensation. So now I'll shift into the second part. The second part of the book really focuses on process. So we'll dive into that. I'll share some stories about how we've operationalized some processes to be more ethical, and really like how we're trying to make our operations consistent with our values, especially when it comes to engaging with research participants. So in the process section of the book, we've included these 5 moments of the research process to focus on: planning and preparation, recruitment and engagement, gathering information, using and sharing, and closing the loop. So in each of these sections, I'm not going to go into depth on like every single sub point in all of these sections. So there are still some secrets for you to read about in the book. You can read it on your own. I'm not giving everything away. But I will highlight stories that illustrate some of these processes. So I have 2 stories for this section. The first, honor historical context. So over the past few years, we've experimented with speaking with historians at the beginning of projects, and especially projects that have really complex and nuanced histories. So we're starting out the project with an informed mindset. So one example, during the first few weeks of a project that we did with an activewear brand, our team consulted a women's history professor with expertise in sports and gender. So we were able to learn about different experiences with participation in sports and movement. We learned about Title IX, the double standards between male and female athletes, the evolution of body image in the media, and recent conversations about gender expression in sports. And that deeper understanding of the history allowed us to recruit more inclusively. It also allowed us to enter into a more nuanced and thoughtful dialogue with our research participants, with our clients, and with each other by having that shared moment and that shared language from early on in the project. And then the second story I'll share from this moment in a project is around establishing roles and norms. So doing this in the early stages of research allows us to be clear, honest, and respectful with folks about what to expect. Doing what we say we're going to do builds trust, and that helps us have more honest conversations with people and limit extractive interactions. So it really ultimately leads to better designs. And an example is the norm around limiting the number of people in a research interview. So in most cases, we keep interviews small, like 2 to 3 designers max for a one-on-one interview. And when we were doing fewer in-home sessions and transitioning to tons of Zoom sessions in the early days of the pandemic, the norm became much less enforced because it's super tempting to invite everyone to observe when you're no longer limited by the constraints of a physical space. So we got a few pieces of feedback from participants who were surprised at the number of people who were showing up to these Zoom sessions. It made them feel uncomfortable and like they were in a fishbowl. So we were basically betraying people's trust by inviting them to a research session and then surprising them in this panel-like environment. And it indicated a need for us to focus on some ongoing education efforts around codifying this norm, both for in-home sessions, which I think we did really well, and then also for Zoom sessions, which we were doing much more of. And then it gets a little bit murkier. We've had some ongoing conversations about whether it feels right to use tools that enable a back room for research sessions. The technology is available, but is it right to have all these people watching without disclosing that to the participants? And where we've landed for now is that if we use that kind of technology, we're transparent with participants about the number of people who are actively observing in the background. So they're aware, even if it's not immediately visible to them. So the second process section is a new section in the book. Recruiting and engaging in those early conversations with participants is such an important part of a research practice. And as so many of you know, it's also a core part of the research operations craft. So I felt very strongly about including this in this new edition of the book, so the work is made more visible as a critical part of the process. And so the story I want to share here is connected to using multiple avenues and generous timelines for recruitment, which supports inclusion. In the first edition of the book, at the time it was written, we were doing a lot of recruiting through friends and family networks. Recruiting with friends and family often meant we were finding people who reinforced existing beliefs and worldviews that were already represented on our design teams. So since then, we've intentionally expanded our approach. We've moved away from relying on friends and family. We also haven't cut that pathway out completely, but we're using multiple sources, and we're always asking whose voices are we missing by going this route for recruitment. We have been building up our own panel of research participants who we connect with through social media and direct outreach. We work with lots of different vendors and external research participant panels. And we also work with community connectors when we need to expand the network of people that we're speaking to, and they can help us connect with those folks. Gathering information This is a section I'm really including for completeness because I want to cover the whole book, but also this book isn't exclusively written for design research operations folks. A lot of this does live in the domain of researchers, and in a research operations role, I spend a lot of time consulting with teams. So before they go into the field, we spend time together making sure they have what they need, like the right consent forms, helping them feel well prepared to do this portion of the work, and then knowing what to do and who to go to when sticky situations come up along the way, as they so often do. And this slide also serves as a really great checklist for me to chat through some of the best practices and what ifs together. So if I'm meeting with the team before they're heading into the field, kind of going through all of these bits together is a pretty complete conversation. And then for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next slide, share more stories over here. So using and sharing, I want to focus here on talking about people like they're in the room. This is such an essential aspect of building a foundation of respect. It's also a way to practice inclusion by honoring people's identities. So the story I want to share here harkens back to recruitment. Principles still hold after the conversation ends, but they also hold before the conversations even begin. In my role, I often meet with teams and discuss screener responses before having a live conversation with a research participant. And I'd found moments when I'd be referring to people in the third person and have like no clue if I was using their preferred pronouns. So we built it into the demographic questions in our screener template as an optional response. And in so many ways, this feels like just a very small edit and a very small update, but it's been really scalable by building into this template that we base all of our screeners on. And from my experience, it makes me feel much more confident when I'm discussing these early screening responses. And it helps me model this behavior really early in the research process, so researchers can continue to hold and build on these practices as they go into the field, synthesize their work, and then share findings. And I can't leave this section without also mentioning privacy and confidentiality. Those are so critical and also core to our work. And I'll just say maintaining a strong relationship with our legal and technology teams has been a must for me. Move on to the last slide here about our process, closing the loop. In my experience, this moment in the research process has had a ton of opportunity for operationalizing. So I'm going to share two examples here. One way of showing gratitude is by sending thank you notes to participants after a research session ends. It's a great way to respect the time and energy they put into the session, and it also provides a really nice sense of closure on the experience. Thank you notes are also one of the very first things to get pushed to the back burner when teams are in the field or in the middle of a really busy research week and then diving into synthesis and analysis. Meanwhile, participants don't know what's going on our side, and they're curious about their impact and really looking for some closure on their experience. So as we more readily adopted Calendly as a scheduling tool, we built in automated thank you notes. Those get sent a few hours after a session ends, and researchers can always follow up with another personalized note, but at the very minimum, now everyone who participates in research receives a note that same day thanking them for their time. And this has also enabled us to do this next example much more systematically. Sorry, it's very warm here today, so drinking a lot of water. Collecting feedback from research participants. So this connects to the responsibility principle. It gives participants a clear and safe space to share their honest perspective, and they can share it anonymously if they prefer. So we used to collect feedback informally, like getting an email, turning it into a PDF, and then plopping it into a folder on Drive. And it was very inconsistent, and it tended to only be like rave reviews from very highly engaged research participants. So we couldn't really do much with it except like pat ourselves on the back and then put it in a folder. So we designed a short survey, and it gets sent out in the automated thank you emails that go out to everyone who participates in research. Consistent feedback has been amazing. It has allowed me to notice patterns that point to gaps in knowledge on teams or things that we can prioritize around ongoing education internally. We also still get the occasional rave review, and it's also just like such a joy to share that with a researcher or with a design team to hype them up a bit and share some things that really resonated with the research participants. And there are many other things in the book that we didn't cover today, but I definitely want to leave you with the feeling that you can do these things now. You can get started by making really simple changes to build towards a more ethical research practice. And I think in operations roles, especially, you have a huge opportunity to have an impact through systems and scale and the work that you do there. I also want to leave you with 2 gifts. The first, we'll put a link in the chat. You can download the book for free and you can explore it on your own and get to a lot of the things that I wasn't able to cover today. And then the second is a little activity for later today if you want a little craft break. So you can screenshot this page. We worked with a really incredible illustrator and have a nice origami motif that runs throughout the book. And you can actually follow these instructions to make your own origami heart. You can use a Post-it note. It's the perfect shape. Oh, it's not showing my note. If you do use a Post-it note, just like stick the sticky part to some fabric so the lint hits the sticky part, and then you can create your own. And I'd encourage you to call back to a principal, write it on the outside of the note, keep it on your desk for a week or 2, and use that as a little bit of a guide for exploring that principle in your work and how you can carry that forward with you. I also want to thank everyone who worked on this book. I didn't do any of this solo, even though I'm the only one here sharing with you today. This was a true team effort, and I'm so grateful for all of my colleagues and their wisdom. And just thank you for being here today. I'm on LinkedIn. Please reach out. I'd love to connect with you. And thank you.
Amazing. That was amazing and really thoughtful of you, Leah. Thank you for the insights on your book and the origami instructions. I'm excited about that. So we do have a few questions. See if we can get through them in the next 5 minutes before our next presentation. And we'll start with George's question. Let me get down to that one. What important aspects of consent should be addressed?
So many. I think when I'm working with a team, what I emphasize is the importance of ongoing consent. So yes, we have a form, but it's so much more than signing a piece of paper and then moving on. So it's consent before they sign the form, making sure we're honest and as transparent as we possibly can be about what people are entering into. And then talking through any questions they might have about the form. I find that questions tend to be pretty rare, but when people have big questions, they really matter. And then when teams go into the field, if someone has signed an electronic form like a week before their session, they may have totally forgotten about that. So when visiting someone in their home or even just hopping on a Zoom interview, taking in those first 5 minutes time to do intros and then time to just review what people are consenting to and giving them an option to walk away. Like if they are no longer into it and don't want to participate, they are welcome to leave the session at that point.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And our other question is, how do you get stakeholders who may not be against these principles, but they haven't really thought about them on board with what you're wanting to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I found that addressing real world examples, like real examples that are happening in time on projects, is when I can have conversations that resonate the most. If it's like not relating to something that matters to someone in real time, it's more like abstract. It's harder to grapple with, might feel less urgent. So really leaning into those moments when people are trying to figure things out, figure out what the right path is, figure out what the right approach is, and making myself available for those conversations.
Yeah, very good. We have maybe, let me see, a couple more minutes. It looks like there's some more interest in hearing about continuous feedback and how you approach that.
Continuous feedback from research participants or from other people?
Let's see. Yeah, from the participants.
Yeah. So it does go out in our thank you emails. I get reminders or like notifications in my inbox whenever someone submits a feedback form. So I'm reading them just in this ongoing basis and sharing them with my team and design teams in real time. One of my goals for this year is to do something a little bit more regularly. Like right now, it's just like a flow of feedback that comes through in real time, but I want to have a more like systematic way of looking through things, maybe on a quarterly basis.
Very nice. So ever evolving, it sounds like.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Relatable. Very relatable. All right. Well, I think that is the last of our questions. Thank you so much for your presentation, Leah. And let's move to Carolyn. So for Carolyn, she is a social scientist living the research ops life. And after nearly 20 years in research, Carolyn now leads a team of research ops and enablement specialists who are building a scalable, open, and ethical research practice for Cisco's security design organization. And giving the mic over to Carolyn here.
Hello, it sounds so fancy. Okay, with that fancy introduction, let's make sure that I can share my screen and actually present to y'all. Give me 2 seconds. Anyone who's worked with me knows that I break technology, so here we go in real time. So while I'm getting this set up, share screen. There we go. And share. Can I also get a volume check? Just I want to make sure that I'm not like screaming at y'all. Are we good? Okay.
Not screaming. You're good.
Cool. Okay, perfect. If my sound goes low or high, someone holler and let me know. Just in case you're wondering where you're at, we're talking about research ethics. We're going to talk about some codes and shoulds of research ethics and how that translates into operations. So this is it's a really great second part to Leah's presentation. She gave you kind of the book on what to do. We're going to take a step back and think a little bit more about like the whys in kind of the foundations of that. If you come away with anything in this talk today, I want you to take away this quote and I want you to think about it. Anytime that you're like, ooh, there's a cool little thing I want to try. I want you to think about if you can do it. You can do whatever you set your mind to, but should you do it? And I also want to give you a little tidbit that this quote here actually originates from Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley has a quote, and I don't have it on hand, but it's basically like your philosophers were so preoccupied with whether they should, they didn't stop to think if they could. So it kind of goes full circle. So anytime that we're talking about this, we're going to be talking about the coulds and shoulds. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to be talking about ethics, research operations, and UX research, what we must do, what we could do, and we're going to talk about some ideas and some advice. I don't have full answers to any of this. There is no 100%. But what I'm hoping to do is start a dialogue and get some questions going that while you're working through your kind of research ops conundrums or your practice, you're thinking, okay, how can we make this a little bit more ethical? What does compliance look like here? Some things that we're not going to be talking about. So I'm not going to tell you what my practice looks like on Cisco security design. And why that is, one, maybe there's a hacker McHacky on here, and I don't want to give all the like details of it, but more so, and more importantly for this talk, is what we build on our team. It's for our team, and it's for our needs and the needs of our participants, right? So we help to build cybersecurity software, right? That's not the same needs as someone working at Facebook or someone working on a market platform or someone working in finance. but the same questions that we're going to talk about, you can take and put into your practice. We're also not going to get into a nitty gritty, really deep discussion of philosophy because I'm not qualified for that. No one on this call probably is. Maybe you are, but I don't know. And we're also not going to talk about whether we should use AI because that's also a discussion for another day. But I want to also tell you about, like I just told you, I'm not qualified to talk about ethics, but I want to tell you about my experience in working with ethics. For about 15-ish years, I was in academic research. My specialty is on neo-Nazis and their effect on immigrants. And so I interviewed everyone, neo-Nazis, immigrants, asylum seekers, police. The data that I carried and the stories that I heard were super crunchy and things that I did not want out. And there are some things like ethical battles that we had to even get my research done. I'm a failed data scientist. I got fired from my data science job. 3 months out of grad school, I got fired. And part of it was because the project that I was working on, I couldn't square ethics with what they needed. And so I failed. I got fired. And then I ended up in UX. And I've been here for 5 years. And so in UX research, I've worked in libraries, I've worked for a library software company, a legal software company, and now cybersecurity. So I think about ethics a lot. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and talking about the same thing when we talk about ethics and compliance and all of this. So we're going to start off with what we should do. And what we should do falls into the realm of ethics. Ethics is this underlying thread of our way of living. It describes how we work with people, how we work with our fellow employees, our clients. It's that underlying thread, right? So this kind of morality, what guides us in our decision making. But we're going to take a step back and not just go with the definition and say we know what we're talking about. We're going to dive in just a little bit. And I'm going to also stop here for a second and recognize that a lot of my talk is based on North American and Western European experiences. So I've got a lot of funny pictures in here. You might not know what they are, and that's totally fine. Kate's got some links she's going to put in there, give some background. If you're wondering why we got this dude in a grocery store, it's from a TV place called The Good Place. We'll get you filled in. But with that also, I'm coming from a Western perspective on ethics, which is very different than some of Eastern perspectives or others. I'm not qualified to talk about those, but I'm qualified to learn about them. So if you have any resources, throw them in the chat, more than happy. So let's talk about the timeline of ethics, because this is not something new. It started way back in the day, again, for Western philosophy here. It started way back in the day with some old Greek dudes. Socrates, Plato's, Aristotle. And a lot of that was subjective, right? So it's this idea of philosopher kings and like this, moral virtues and like what we strive to be. So that ruled the day for a long time, from pop to the 19th century, because that's when it really starts to affect applied research. So we've got these two camps of philosophy. We've got two larger camps of philosophy. We've got consequentialism and deontology. Consequentialism is this idea of acting for the greater good, right? So every decision you make, it must be made for the greater good. This is this idea of utilitarianism coming from Bentham and Mill. And you've got this other field that's more on the objective side with your categorical imperatives coming from Kant. So the things that you do, you must be able to will as a universal norm, no matter what. And so these two are conflicting because one of them's like, oh, well, we could do this really bad thing, but it's for the best of everybody. Or you can't do that because you can't will it to be for the whole universe and for all actions. So this kind of happens, this conversation continues till World War II. World War II, not a good thing, big atrocity. But with science, there's a lot of advances in science. The problem is that a lot of people are harmed in that, right? And so we come out of World War II with this thing called the Nuremberg Code. And basically that is, if somebody's participating in research, they have to be able to consent. There has to be some consent and they have to have full consent. Cool. People are opting into research. We're doing our thing post World War II, but also problematic because we got things like Tuskegee. So we've got the Tuskegee Airmen. If you're not familiar with it, basically a bunch of airmen were infected with syphilis. We had the cure, but we didn't give it to them because science. Let's see what happens. There's some things with Robert's Cape where we split groups of people into 2 groups, and then we, did special treatments on them. Milgram shock experiment, Zimbardo's prison experiment. There's so many more. Like we could do like a whole semester on these things. So this is all happening. And then Tuskegee comes out to open, and academia is like, oh no, we got to get some rules here. We have to get some regulations. So this is bananas. And so we come up with the Belmont report. And the Belmont report is basically what underpins all of our IRB process. IRB is Institutional Review Board. So if you're in academia, you do any research with participants, any humans, anything living, be it animals, humans, whatever, you have to get IRB approval. So that's what we should do. That's the basis. Again, we could do a whole semester, but we only got 20 minutes. So what must we do? We're going to talk about compliance. Now, compliance is a little bit tricky because that's the bare minimum of what you must do. I'm going to do a little hat tip to Hannah Arendt here and talk about the banality of evil, because you are following the rules. That can also mean that you're just following the rules. Well, the rules might not be moral, right? So this is where you, as researchers and re-ops people, need to think, okay, well, here's the rule, but what's the right thing to do? How do we make this right by our people and make sure that we're mitigating harm? So now that we've talked about the foundations of ethics, and we're like this close to an existential crisis, maybe because your brains are probably thinking about all the things, we're going to talk about what we could do. So what we could do, we're going to talk also about new tech and shiny things, because y'all are probably here wondering, what do we do about AI, right? How do we make AI moral and ethical? How do we make how do we take what Leah told us about being kind to our participants, honoring them, doing no harm, protecting their data, and protect us from these machines, these AIs, right? How do we square this? Doing user research without users. Like, this is a little bananas, but we've got, y'all have probably heard stakeholders be like, oh, well, we could just run it through ChatGPT and get our personas that way. Like, I can't see a raise of hands, but I'm assuming there's some head nods of like, yeah, we've heard this. And the thing is that these tools might be really useful, right? Like big data models, they are useful. The problem is that we need to ask questions about where the data is stored, how they're using the data. And as re-ops professionals, we have to put our big thinking hats on. So we're going to pause for a second and do story time. So story time, we're going to talk about, it's a mix of a real life story and then like my worst case scenario, like my nightmare scenario. So there's a product called LastPass, and this is part of the real story. There's a product called LastPass, and it's a password manager, right? You put your passwords in there, it comes up with these great passwords. You don't have to think about it. And it says that it's in this big vault. Problem is they had a data breach. That means a lot of people's master passwords are now out on some web for people to buy. When they did the incident review, they found that it was because of a breach on a third-party software on a Plex server from one of their employees, right? So it wasn't anything that product did. It wasn't anything that product's vendors did. It was something affiliated with another tool, right? And so as re-ops professionals, it's our duty to sit there and think about, okay, so I'm storing, I'm setting up this product for my researchers. We're just going to call it Joe's super product, right? So Joe's super product, it's cool, it's amazing. They tell me that it's SOC certified, it's GDPR, all this stuff, right? But we want to then look, who's Joe working with, right? What's Joe's situation looking like? Because if we put our participants' data in there, I put, participant number 3's data in there, and participant number 3 is telling me about their incident response workflow. I'm going to put that in Joe's super software, and then his third party has access to it. So we have to do that due diligence when we're talking to our vendors. That's also my nightmare scenario. So anyone on my team who's wondering like why I'm asking what problem does that solve, that's why. I want us to be aware of solutions looking for problems. If anyone on my team comes to me and says, I got this really cool idea, let's do this thing. First question I ask is, what problem are we solving? right? Why are we doing this thing? What's the tool going to get us? Because as ReOps professionals, we are keeper of the tools and we are maintainers of compliance. It is not our researchers' job to know which tool is using SOC 2. It's not our researchers' job to know where the data are stored, right? We need to make sure if we have European participants, we cannot be storing their data in the US, right? But we need to make sure that that's happening. It's not on our researchers. They trust us to make sure that they're doing right. So again, I'm going to ask y'all, and it's a new picture. We're serious this time. I want you all to be thinking whether or not we should. I don't care if we could. Should we? Is this the right solution? So some of the things that, and Kate's gonna put this in the chat for me. Some of the places you can go to get started, start thinking about ethics and AI. These people are a lot smarter than me. They've been thinking about this a lot more than me. I go there if I'm wondering, like, what are some things that we need to be thinking about? Some of the things, here's some 3 steps, sorry. 3 steps, think about, is that you don't have to get prepared if you stay prepared, right? And this goes just for about anything in life. Like, I've literally hired someone because they told me that planning prevents piss poor performance, right? So making sure that you stay ahead of the issues. If you see something happening in the far away, let's make sure that we're addressing that, especially in terms of like ethics and how our tools are going to affect our participants. Because we're in the business of future proofing our research practice. If we're not doing that, we can't scale. We're going to be stuck in a reactive state. And part of future proofing is thinking, what's the harm that's being done to our participants, to our stakeholders, to our users? And if we don't think about these hard things and we don't take a moment to contemplate how our data are being stored, how they're being used, then we shouldn't be doing this. But I know we can do hard things and we can take a moment, stop, breathe before we make decisions. We also have rules that we can follow. These things, we're not stuck in just a place where, what are we doing? There are rules that are established and exist. We've got GDPR, you've got PIPEDA, you've got the CCPA. There are so many alphabet combinations of laws and regulations. You can also work with your legal team. I love my legal team at Cisco. Why? Because they keep me out of hot water. My InfoSec team also keeps me out of hot water, right? And then the thing about this is also that they are in the business of protecting the company. So when you're talking to your legal team about like, hey, data, this and that, you're talking to your InfoSec team, they're going to be looking out for the company. So it's your place to take then what's in, what Leah gave us, right? That book, talking to your coworkers, thinking about like, all these ethics that you're working from, and working with your legal team, making sure that you have an ethical and secure practice. The third thing, which is where I love to be, is creating your own rules, right? We've got rules from GDPR, we've got rules from legal and InfoSec. Well, how are we going to make that work for our team, right? Co-creating some of that documentation, things that people need to know. And on my team, I'll tell you one little thing about the team. If you want in my Dovetail instance or our Dovetail instance, you got to go through data privacy training. Because I don't want just anybody in there being able to pull data and do whatever. You need to know and respect the PII. Some things that I pull from personally, and what kind of guides my decisions on like how to go forth as a ReOps, these, and as Leah was talking, I was like, man, the APA guidelines match almost like exact for IDEO. And I was like, there's probably a reason for that, right? So we're going to take a little moment, look at the APA, so the American Psychological Association's guidelines. These are 5 rules on ethics and how to be an ethical psychologist, or the practice of psychology. We're going to do a high level of it because I think I'm close on time. But we're going to do that. And then you can check out Leah's book as well from IDEO and get all this. So first one is beneficence and non-malfeasance. I can't say those words. Basically, it means do no harm. right? And by doing no harm, we want to create systems that encourage a safe environment for participants and researchers, right? And I got a quick little story about that. One of the positions I've held, researchers came to me and were like, "Yo, my participants are really hostile. They're really mean. Like they are being jerks." Of course, they're using a little bit more colorful language, and I was like, "Yo, we don't condone this, right?" So rather than like, we can't control what the participants are doing, we created a program to empower our researchers and teach them like, hey, if you're seeing this, like this is where we stand, right? Like these are the rules of engagement, and we empowered them to stand up for themselves. And that participant or that researcher didn't really have a problem after that, because they felt empowered and they knew that they had a support system behind them. Fidelity and responsibility. This is established in trust, right? Leah talked about this. Like we need to make sure that our stakeholders trust us, that we build that, but also being aware of the responsibilities of our work to society, the space in which we work. So, you know, for us, cybersecurity, if we send out some insights and those insights then get put into the product, and then that product goes live, we got to make sure that we're doing right, because our product not hitting the mark has big ramifications, right? So we got to make sure that we keep that, and we keep that responsibility in our hearts and our heads. And I put manage conflict and minimize exploitation. A lot of that is like making sure that our participants are compensated, right? Like they give us their time, we tell them thank you, or you give them a token of appreciation or whatever, but also doing that for our researchers as well. Third thing, integrity, right? Solid, we've got to keep our promises and avoid unwise or unclear, any unclarity. That's hard to do in an ever-shifting business environment. And people who are on our team, Francisco right now on the call, they're like, wow. So we just reordered our team about 6 months ago, and we're still in that process of building, right? So they're probably like, hold on, what's this process that you're talking about? We're building it, friends. But building it in a way that we're transparent and open, and that people know that we're doing our best to keep our promises. Part of that's data governance, privacy, making sure we're paying our participants, but also to our stakeholders also. Justice, this one is, I think this is a little bit where we get into the ResearchOps part of it. So this is an exact quote from the APA, you know, justice and fairness entitles all persons, etc. Where there's brackets of research, they used to use psychologists. I just straight up lifted this. And I believe that this is the cornerstone for ResearchOps in terms of ethics and making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to our stakeholders, making sure that we have a proper practice. Some of these things being open is like a research catalog, maintaining open access to data, again, with an asterisk, because you got to do my data privacy training first before you get in there. And then the second is enabling research, right? Like, how do we empower? Because we're never going to be able to do all the research that we get requested, right? But how are we going to empower people and enable people to do research if, you know, they've been in design world their whole life? Well, let's figure it out, right? Like, how do we make research available to them? It's a conundrum. It's kind of spicy, but it's something we always strive towards. And the last one is respect for people's rights and dignity, right? And that's, again, for everybody. Diversity and inclusion. Like, it's no secret that cybersecurity and tech in general is made up of a lot of white dudes, right? But when we're recruiting, we want to make sure that we get diversity in our panel. Like, I get mad when I was a researcher, I would get so mad when I'm like, okay, like everybody is the same on this panel. Like, why? So like, let's work with that. Let's do our best to get an inclusive in a panel that actually reflects our product's population. And then with that, also protecting everybody who's involved. And that goes from data procurement. So from collecting the data all the way through. With that, there is no perfectly ethical research practice. And I hit like the highest of high levels on all these things. Like, each slide of this, we could go for 2 hours on. There are big conversations on each part of this. But the only thing that we can do is to continue to examine our work, continue to do big introspections and think about, did we do our best? And strive to be better as we learn and grow. And to do that, we need to recognize where we were. Again, remember, we started old Greek dudes and now we're here. How do we continue to make this a little bit better? Got some resources. We can put these in the slides. I can also send these to you later if you want. These are some resources just kind of off the top of my head. I really appreciate Erica Hall's book. I love that so much. Like it's really a good guide. I give it to all my new researchers that come in. IDEO, your book, like Leah, y'all did a wonderful job on that book. I read it the other day and I was like, yes, highlight, bookmark, like doing all the screen grabs. And there's some other things too, right? So we can look at market and social research outside. Casey had a wonderful talk at a ReOps conference a couple of years ago. She also loves working with legal teams. And Noreen just published an article the other day about looking like what questions you need to ask when evaluating your software. You can also always reach out to me or Leah. Sorry, I didn't ask Leah if they can reach out to you. I'm assuming they can. You can always reach out to me if you need. Just reach out, post on LinkedIn, whatever you need. You're probably like, how do I get a hold of you? You can reach out on LinkedIn. I'm starting a writing practice on Medium. It's hit or miss. We'll see how it goes. And then if you're in the ReOps community, you can ping me there. If you're in Cha-Cha Club, you can ping me there. And that's all I got. I'm sure that there are questions in the chat. I haven't been looking at it and I apologize. There we go.
Awesome job. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Yes, you've got plenty of questions. So our first question is from Devin, and they're asking, are there any story times for dealing with stakeholders who need some extra convincing on using ethical practices instead of cutting corners?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So thank you for the hard question, Devin. Yeah, it's one of those things with stakeholders, because a lot of times I've often had times where stakeholders are like, well, I want to ask questions during the interview. And you're just like, ooh, I don't know, because sometimes they're going to ask questions that like straight up are not ethical. Like they're going to ask the questions that you're like, no, right? And so in that situation, I hate to say this, but I would really rely on like education and chatting with them and saying like, hey, you know, like, here's where we're coming with the data, and like, or like, here's where we're coming with the research. What are your, like, here are my concerns. What are some of the concerns you might have now that you've heard this? Or like, how might we compromise with this? I hesitate to say cutting corners, but look, we have to compromise some, but there are some things that like you need to have your BATNA, right? So a BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, but you need to have the line which you will not cross. And for me, there are some clear things like I had one time where I had a PM in an interview where they were observing, and then they went and reached out to the participant afterwards and were like, I heard you say this in the interview and blah, blah, blah. And friends, when I say my head nearly exploded, like it grew 3 times, just so big, like of just like, what are you doing? Right. And so we had a clear talk about it. And my line was, if that PM couldn't understand why that was wrong, then they don't come to my sessions anymore. And they didn't come to sessions anymore. So it's one of those things. Also talk with your team, talk with your boss, make sure your boss or, you know, your leader has your back on it. And usually they will. So yeah.
Great point. Yeah, definitely having that support is really important. My next question comes from, and maybe I'll get this wrong, Chinese. And they ask, are there any story times of convincing the org that compensating participants equals an ethical practice? And maybe you can share a little bit on your stance on that, because I'm not sure if we covered it in the chat.
Wait, was that like, yes, it is an ethical practice, or is unethical?
Is an ethical. But yeah, what is your stance too?
Yeah, I say it's 100% an ethical practice. And I'll give my little 2 cents, and then Leah, I'll ask you what you think on this too. I think it is, because that person's given us, they're giving us their time. They're giving us their effort and their brain power. We're asking them to work for us, basically. And it is not, we have laws against free labor in this country. and I'm sure in
Mhm.
many other countries as well. So I don't understand why we shouldn't be giving people some token of appreciation. With that said, I understand there are legal issues when you have like people in public sector. At least for us, like we cannot give people
Right.
any tokens of appreciation in public sector, but we need to be at least acknowledging their contributions, and letting them know that they've been seen and heard and that we appreciate their work. So
Right.
that's where I'm at. Also, I'm talking on Caro time. I'm not talking on Cisco time right now. So
Not a lawyer. Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
not a lawyer, not right now on Cisco time. So yeah, Leah, what would you say on that?
I totally agree. I mean, IDEO is a consultancy, and so we're receiving financial compensation for doing the work. So we share some of that with our participants. And that very much feels like the right thing to do. But also when depending on who we're working with, who our clients are, who our research participants are, some people can't accept financial compensation. So we try to work out other alternatives, like maybe it's working, like if they're frontline workers, seeing if they can do a research interview while they're on the clock. So they're getting paid through their job for doing this thing that's benefiting their company, or moving a research session over lunch or over dinner. So we can provide somebody with a meal during their time with us. So there's a little bit of benefit there, at least taking something off their plate that they would have to do. Anyways.
Thank you guys for sharing that. So we have a lot of other questions, but we're running right out of time. Thank you, Carolyn, so much for your questions here, or your presentation here. It looks like you have a question though. Was there
Oh
anything
no,
that you
I'm
wanted
just
to add?
I'm looking at the chat and these are some good spicy
I
questions.
know.
So what we might do is just like pop them into like have a little document or something later and share out.
Yes, yeah, reach out to Carolyn or Leah on LinkedIn. And again, we do these quarterly. So thank you all for joining today, and thank you both for presenting. Right.